Oh, it's good time. I don't know how that's going to come out.
Excellent. Good morning, hello and welcome to our next walk. This time we're going to do the church, the schoolrooms, Fisher's Pond, Hensting, but actually like last time we're not actually going to go to Fisher's Pond and Hensting. Like the pavilion, we're going to talk about what's happening and going on, but we're going to walk back along Nobs Crook back to the community centre. Otherwise I believe it would take up a bit too much time. But
you're not finishing?
we're going to be back at the community centre. Did I mention that to you? Yes. And please feel free to make any contributions of any interest or any points of note. Like I meet a few people who have actually attended the village school here in the past, and they come up with anecdotes of how the school was.
I finished here about July 1959.
Oh yes. So we're going to go across to the church and have a look at that first, and then talk about the village school in the car park after we've done the church. So we cross over the main road here. There's a crossing at the moment.
Can I just make a point? Just here, there used to be a massive oak tree. There was a seat went all the way around it. We all used to sit around on the seat as kids. They took it down to the dangerous
What year did they take it down?
I would said in the 60s. I was still here when I left. But that building there was erected about 1957, I would say, 58.
I'm just looking at a notice here. 120th anniversary. Remains very much the same as it was built in the 1840s. They've done a lot of work to improve the roof and the ground and the floor recently. The pulpit there was made of Caen stone from northern France and cost about £24 in its time. I don't think it's used anymore. I think they prefer to do the sermons from the ground, from the floor. But they've still got some memorials from the 19th century along the walls. The pews are still here. The windows along the sides were reordered in the 1950s. There were some to the past school children, past vicars, each donated by local people and organisations. There's one behind here. Gift of Branbridge Lodge. The two large stained glass windows on either side are typical of the Victorian period of stained glass work, where they use a lot of blues, reds and deep vibrant colours. There's a little story to each of the windows. This window here has the war memorial to Colden Common, showing the servicemen who lost their lives in the Great War and in the Second World War. As you see, in the First War, the Great War, there was a longer list of casualties than in the Second World War. One name occurs twice. There's an Albert Budd and a Richard Budd. A Budd is buried in the churchyard. We'll have a look round at the war, at servicemen's graves.
It's still a village name, isn't it? It's still a village name, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. If you look through the list of the Great War, And any other local names which are still common around?
Well, the chap there, Tom Laversach, his nephew looks after was involved with the football team. And Eric has been doing some research because they didn't know where he was killed, where he was buried. I looked up some bits and pieces on the internet and gave to Eric, which prompted him to go to the Green Jackets Museum, and they found that he died in Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq, and they've now found his grave. The War Commission found his grave. But of course they can't. They were going to go and try and go out there, but they can't get into Iraq. So. And it was in the last few weeks of the war that he died as well, after being called up at the very start of the war.
Thank you.
He was in the reserves of the what is now TA, and he was on exercise at the time when the war broke out. So he was sort of kept on. So he went all the way through the war.
Yes, we'll have a little walk around to the front of the church. As you can see, these individual windows are ones the gift of the Mothers' Union in memory of past worshippers. They all commemorate a little group of the village, past vicars. And a few memorials, one of the previous vicar, Percy Monroe.
That's interesting. Foulis Court is listed as being in Fair Oak there. Yes. Foulis Court.
Colden Common.
Well, it's right opposite, the entrance is right opposite Pensting Lane.
Oh, right.
If you come out of Pensting Lane, went straight across, straight down, you'd be there.
Top area.
No, it's not, it's Fisher's Pond.
Now, Colden Common is part of a benefice of Twyford, Owslebury and Morsted. It's been amalgamated in the last couple of years. So instead of we have one vicar now overseeing the 4 parishes. Looking from here, there are a couple of old photographs, and in the corner there's some photographs of the church in the 1930s. You can go down and have a look at that. So I don't think the interior of the church has changed much since the 1840s.
Is that when that was finished?
I presume so, Val.
When it was finished?
Yes. 1843 is that's it. So if you look at the beams and the roof and the pews.
Do you say they were the same pews?
I'm not sure if they are, they could well be.
I don't see why they wouldn't be, actually. No.
I think the organ may have been refurbished, but I'm not sure about the age of the organ, but I think it's very good quality still. And somebody mentioned about the lozenge above the door. That's been querying me for a long time. I didn't know if that was one of the benefactors of the original church, because quite a few of the local landowners, I assume, gave quite substantial donations.
It wouldn't be the Bishop's Arms, would it?
Churchyard here is a site of special nature conservation because no fertilisers or pesticides have been used. The management of the churchyard here is to keep, as we said, the paths clear and the grass cut nearby, but relieve the longer grass to grow. There's a progression of wild flowers from the snowdrops, daffodils, bluebells, daisies. As you can see, there's some orchids here. We leave those to self-seed. In the churchyard, there's a few quite tall trees, specimen trees, and there's some yew trees, which were commonly planted in the 19th century, and poplars as reminiscent of the Holy Land trees. Looking round the churchyard, I shall show you some of these servicemen's graves and names of common people in the village, like the Francis family, who we mentioned further last time on the walk. We go along this way. Here, in Portland stone, they've got the number Private G. Cockman, 6883, the Hampshire Regiment, 13th of October 1916. And there's some orchids behind. The grass has been cut now at this time. If the grass is left too long, it grows and all the wildflowers will get smothered by the tall grasses. This is left a little bit longer for the orchids to self-seed, but the grass cutting was started yesterday evening. A couple of little patches. Members of the Barney family buried here. You may remember in December last year the road was actually closed, and if you came along here you saw sort of literally buildings of flowers and mementos which lasted a week or two, and this is the grave. I shall read it out to you. Priscilla Barney died 1st of December 2012, aged 90. Loved and remembered always. I think she was one of the Barney matriarchs or the grandmother.
And some of them live in Pharaoh. There's a Pharaoh block, but Glen Park belongs to the Barney family, and so does Ashford Stables. Down there, yeah, they own that as well. So they don't travel much these days, I don't think.
The Lych Gate was erected between 1931 and 1933 in memory of a vicar, the Reverend Streatfield. He came in 1931 but passed away shortly, and that was erected by his family. There's a little bell in the roof there. You may hear it on Sunday mornings, but nobody actually rings it. It's just done by a button in the church. And a matter of interest, those cottages there, I think are called Black Nell's Cottage. You see it on the old maps of Colden Common. The first one is Black Nell's Cottage. I'm not sure the origin of the name, but
I think it was a local family.
yes. So those cottages are well over 100 years old, but if you come again, there's a little, it's called an outhouse in the cottage. You can see it, there's some washing in between now, you can't see it, but when you see the outside privy, that's how it used to be. As you see in this part of the church, yes. Yes. As you see, there's a wonderful selection of wildflowers here, and I came yesterday. There's those little brown butterflies and fritillaries, and that yesterday evening many moths were here. Yes, we'll go family in the village and the Coffs, but these graves here are members of the Francis family. Horace Francis, 1902, and another one. Yes, we go up the steps here to the...
Must have been a
New
lot
part.
older.
With Emma Boys, my great-grandmother, my grandfather's mother. She died in July 1904, age 54 or 55.
It's quite young, isn't it?
Yes, yes. He died very young as well. He was only about 40 when he died.
And are you the remaining Boys family in
I
the
have
village?
a brother. I'm the remaining one in the village, yes.
And your brother is?
He's in Lincolnshire.
Oh.
Any of your children still here?
No, my daughter's in Eastleigh, my son's now in London, and my other daughter's in Bracknell. So.
New part of the churchyard has been consecrated. I think it's had several extensions. I think the present extension may go to the boundary fence or to the tree or where the white post is along there. As you can see, walking around, there are many familiar recent names you may know in the village. And yes, somebody mentioned that. Yeah. And from here we can get a good view of the old vicarage. You see how big and imposing. I think the vicarage cost £1,200 to build, as opposed to the church being £1,600. So it shows the standing at the time of the local vicars. It's been divided into flat, in I think 2 homes, but it still retains its character with the chimneys, the gables, and I think there's quite a nice walled garden in them. Behind the hedge at the back, you can just see the new vicarage in the orange red brick. I think that's built in the 1960s. We'll have a walk back round. A bit more modest, isn't it? Michael Wright, who had the foundation stone of the community centre, he unfortunately passed away, and I think his wife comes up quite regularly. Oh, this a rabbit. We mentioned about rabbits.
Doesn't seem since he died. No, she said actually yesterday or the day before something about it's 5 years now. She says I'm just getting on with it.
Walk, I think would be.
I don't think we can get a family. If he comes out, we'll tell him what we're doing.
We'll see if he wants to Well, let's have a little walk round.
We're going back a few generations.
We'll stay this side of the road anyway. Home guard was mentioned just across the road, but in the community centre there's a photograph of Colden Common Home Guard, and I believe there's a gentleman called Lionel Register, who was a member of the Home Guard. He was in the farming service, so he's never called up. I believe he lived just
He lives in the bungalow?
yes, in the bungalow just at the back, and he was 100 years old or 101 when he died a year or 2 ago, and he was buried in a new part of the churchyard. I think they put a few farming tools and farming produce in his grave to keep him going when he was working.
For many years he dug the graves over there.
Yeah, there is. Yes, that's right. And I think I believe he looked after the hedge as well, and many other things. Yes, Lionel Ridge.
He was the village grave digger for years.
The school, also with the new church, they found a need for a new school. Owslebury had a school and Twyford had a school, and 100 foot was donated by Dame St John Mildmay for a new school. Education at that time was neither free nor compulsory, and the school was built by public subscriptions and the grant of £75 from the government for furniture. They had to have, later on, a school weekly log. In 1874, there were 101 children in the school, in 3 classes, under a master and 1 or 2 monitors, with a sewing mistress employed part-time for the girls and the younger children. At that time, there were more pupils, and I'm not quite sure which was which, but a new room was added which doubled the floor space, and the gallery was put up for the infants in 1872. In 1910, there were 200 children now attending, and they found a need for a new school, and was built for extra 80 infants, and that's this one here, a cost of £878. There is no discrimination between boys and girls. By that time, some education acts had come into being, and I think you didn't have to pay for schooling anymore, and you had to have some attendances compulsory. In 1948, 39 of the older children over 11 were transferred to Fair Oak Senior School, thus changing the nature of this school to a primary school. In 1975, the school was moved to Upper Moors Road. This became part of the church rooms, and I think you told us the age of this.
Yes, it was put up around 1958, so 57, 1958.
Was that just as an annex?
There's an extra classroom, yes. The time the headmistress was a lady called Mrs. Smith. She was quite a robust lady. She used to run her class there. The infant school was over the other side, the first year of the school. So there were only 4 classes, 4 years. There was a Miss Pogson, was in one classroom there, Mr. Twyford in the other classroom.
Did you go to one of these schools?
Yes, I was here from 56 to 59.
You said,
I think in the old school across the road, there are 3 or 4 homes now. It's been
Yes.
and one was up for sale last year. I think it has been sold, so anyone who was interested, they could have it from the room, but I think it has been sold.
I think when the school was operating here, they built the kitchens in there, sort of about 57 or 8. But when I first came here, we used to have to go over there for our lunch, and the meals were delivered in great big churns in the back of a big green van. And used to see the van come in about 11:30, and all these big churns would go in, and the women would be there ladling the stewed cabbage out and the potatoes out.
But hey, you're still here.
Yeah, we survived.
From our village history.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the benefactress, did they live at Brambridge House? Does anybody know?
Marmaid.
Yeah. Were they Brambridge House?
I thought they were Marlow, actually.
I don't. I'm asking the question.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think there are several benefactors. I think there's another one from Marwell called Standish.
Yes, I've heard
And
that.
we could have pointed out her grave, but some people doing some family ancestry found her grave of Standish, and they've tidied up under the adopt a grave scheme in the churchyard. It's just near the first serviceman's grave. There are 3 or 4 benefactors, because there's no government money, income to support the early schools.
Paul, I know about the adopted graves, but I think a lot of people here won't know about it. So could you just explain what it is?
Well, to help the maintenance of the churchyard, especially the old churchyard, it's quite a large area, and some of the graves where we do the grass cutting are a bit sort of overgrown, and people do come to like to look after their sort of research some ancestors. And so to help the maintenance, Mike Gaskell adopted this scheme called Adopt a Grave. Anybody from the village, if they feel so interested, can have 1 or 2 of the old graves, tidy it up, tidy some of the overgrowing ivy and brambles and vegetation, just have 1 or 2. There are 1 or 2 graves which look particularly well kept, as I could have pointed them out as we came along. One of them was the Standish grave, and I think there's 3 or 4, or I'm not quite sure how many are on the inventory now, but they're still ongoing, and if anybody's interested in carry on, just contact Mike Gaskell. I've got his number here, or it could be in the church porch, or it's in the village newsletter. And further to that, we have some regular church maintenance programs. In December, we have what's called a church leaf sweeping up all the leaves. If we leave too many leaves, they're good for the soil, but too many leaves form a dense mulch and they squash all the wild flowers and the seeds. So we rake a lot of them up. And we also have this time a patch of cutting down the long grass. We leave the orchids there, and we have a spring tidy up. And we have also grass cutting. Group of 4 or 5 of us cut the grass. Each has their own patch of grass to cut. I've got the front and another patch. Derek, as you saw, besides the hedging, he has another patch of grass to cut. Mike Gaskell has 2 patches of grass to cut. And there's a gentleman called Steve from Wardle Road. He has his own patch to cut, and there's somebody else. But any other help is welcome. As we said, it is the village church and people see it from the main road. Anyway, we're going to walk along here to a little lane on the right called Nobs Crook.
There used to be a galvanised sort of shed, and it was run by an old boy called Bill Laws. This galvanised shed that had this saw in and a big old petrol paraffin stationary engine. And he had a big wood rack here which he used to put timber on, sort of wind the handle, take the wood through the saw. And he had like a lean-to shed on the side of it where he lived. It was a real ramshackle old place. But he had an unfortunate accident. He went to Queen's Head one night and had a few too many and came back and inadvertently poured petrol into his paraffin stove and lit it, and I'm afraid he died of his injuries. That was about 1960, 61 maybe. So it was a nice old boy, I believe.
What's the house called?
Woodvale.
Woodvale, yes, I noticed that. I thought, well, you know, it's a bit of history there preserved, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is indeed.
But I can remember sort of big stacks of wood out here. Big, huge great trunks of timber.
Yeah, we'll just have
How old was he when he died then?
He was an old boy, he was probably 70, you know, so the thing is, in the 1960s, you know, people sort of 60, 70 were old people, whereas today, you know, I'm going on 40, you know.
Yeah, me too. It's all sort of overgrown though, isn't it? It's not used, is it? John? Friend. Questions to ask?
I should go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
So he volunteered to come along because he's a
But he is a fountain.
as I said on our last walk, when we stopped at the pavilion, we just viewed the properties and development along Main Road. The same here. We're just going to have a little talk about Fisher's Pond and Hensting. If you saw the sign, it's been erected in the last few years, Fisher's Pond. There's also one for Grandbridge. They have their own little identity still. The 1841 map, tithe map, showed the Queen's Head could be the oldest pub in the village, and it showed a cottage by Pondside Cottage and one other home. That was Fisher's Pond. Fisher's Pond is on clay. There's a big lake, a series of lakes behind. In the Middle Ages, it used to be owned by the Bishops of Winchester for one of his fish lakes. They had carp and eels. I think at the moment the fish is
Carp.
as a carp.
Bottom feeders, which is why there's no vegetation on the lake. They disturb the soil and nothing can root, whereas at the beginning and towards the end of the last century, I would imagine, it was covered with water lilies before the introduction of the carp, reintroduction of the carp. And the lakes used to stretch in medieval times from Marwell Zoo, Marwell House. There was a little one, a middle one and a big one, but these days they go that way down the lane. Whistler, the artist?
No, somebody.
Well, he did.
I could look at. Sorry,
Yes, for a short while, in the house next door to me.
What's his name?
Whistler.
Somebody else there in their infancy. I'll look it up.
Yes, and the gentleman that lived in the house next door to us when we first moved in, who'd been there a very long time, said that was why he had a mound at the bottom of his garden, because he didn't want a flat garden going down to the lake, he wanted a bit of interest. So there's just a little mound there.
The Fisher's Pond pub is more recent than the Queen's Head pub, built in the 1930s. I think in the 1930s there was a plan for more development along the main road, but that was stopped. Only a few bungalows were built, plus the pub. And there used to be, I've noticed, skating in the winter, you could use it, and a popular little terrace garden. They had sort of outings from Winchester, I noticed on the King Alfred's buses to Fisher's Pond. Little country
was actually a tea room.
It was tea rooms.
Yes.
It was run by an old lady called Sally Slade in the sort of 60s, 50s, 60s. And there used to be a big, like a big, huge circular bird cage outside, which stood probably about 10, 12 feet high. And she used to have beautiful parrots and exotic birds in there.
What little hamlet Fisher's Pond and Hensting was, because it had its own post office opposite the Queen's Head. I think that closed 1970s or 80s.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was run by an old boy called Ernie Hill, who was Benny Hill's uncle. Because when
That's the connection.
Benny Hill.
I've been a meologist too long.
when I was a boy, Benny Hill used to spend time with my uncle. And in the afternoon, he used to wander up, wait for us outside the school gate when at playtime, and we all used to go out there and talk to him, and he was such a funny man, We used to tell him jokes and he used to laugh, sort of thing, but he probably knew them all long before. But
In the community centre, there's a lovely photograph of the old post office with a carriage and a gentleman sort of dressed up in the carriage with a lovely horse. After the post office was closed, it became an old lighting shop during the beginning of my time here for about a few years. And now, unfortunately, they sort of some kind of office, I think, with maybe a flat above.
And there was a garage there as well.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, on the left-hand side of the Fisher's Pond garage, where the guy got a workshop and does diesel repairs in there now, no conditioning. But if it is a matter of interest, if you go along the Fair Oak Road from Fisher's Pond, just before you start to go up the hill, if you look in the field on the outside there, that's banked up all the way round. And I've read somewhere that was a Roman trout farm out there, so it was a fish farm in Roman times.
Oh, golly.
But if you stand at the bottom of the hill there and look out there, you can see where it's actually there's a man-made dike all the way around the field.
In contrast to Fisher's Pond, if you go up Hensting Lane to the Downs, there's a village called Hensting, which is very attractive in itself. It's all part of Colden Common, and some of the thatched cottages there, I believe, are 300 or 400 years old. There's a kennel farm there with the brick timbers, with the timbers and the brick infill, which has been farmed. I think, reading in the village history, it's farmed by members of the Hatt family, H-A-T-T, into the 1970s. Hats are quite popular in the churchyard. And there's another farm called Elm Farm further up, which was from Ship's Timbers. There's a few more cottages. There's a Hensting, Hampshire Therapy horse riding stables in there. I believe it's quite popular. And just outside our patch, it's in Owslebury, but there's a lovely long thatched barn. It's a listed building. I think that dates from the 12th or 13th century. Could be for the tithe barn where they had to donate a tenth of the crops to the landowner. I'm not sure about the exact history, but it has occasional open days, and that is a listed building. Here we're in a little lane called Nobs Crook.
Sorry, Paul, could I just say for those that have moved in, Hensting is actually where the clay meets the chalk in Hensting Hamlet. There are an awful lot of wells. Practically every house in the village, if you look into it, has got a well. The thatched cottage has still got a well that works, but they don't use the water. And some of you will remember, a few years back we had torrential rains over a very long period of time, and the whole of Hensting village flooded, so that they couldn't use their water, they couldn't use their toilets for about 2 months. They were having to use portaloos and take it up to Jenny Gray's farm. And after that, when the water subsided, the council stepped in and built really deep ditches right the way down, helped by the residents and the farmer down there, so that now the water does go into the ditches. But only a couple of years ago, the water running across the road was so bad that the whole of the road surface disappeared, and it was down to earth and stones. And because of the force of the water coming down and hitting the clay, having nowhere to go, it just completely destroyed the road surface again.
It has improved now.
Well, they have they came out and redid the road eventually in the dry season, and it is okay again, but that is a problem that they will always have because of the unique makeup of the soil and an awful lot of springs, because the water comes down and up through the chalk. It's the clay, there's nowhere to go, the place pours it, and you get quite a lot of
It's a valley, isn't it? You'd almost expect there to be a stream.
When they built the big trout pond, as you go into the Swift's farm, they came in there with the earth movers. They took the topsoil off, and then they took the blue clay off, and then they dug out the lower clays, made the hole, and they sort of had 3 banks of the different types of soil. Then they brought the upper clay, I think it's called blue clay, and they lined the hole with that, and then sort of put all the lower diggings around the outside and landscapes with the topsoil to form the trout pond.
Yeah,
because then it's got a natural basin in it which prevents the water from passing.
we actually, if we dig down deep enough in our garden, we do get lumps of that blue clay, and you can literally, the children can play with it,
If it's
make
compacted,
it into things,
it goes like
because
concrete.
it's just solid clay.
Is it actually coloured blue?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's got a
there's
blue
red.
tint
There's
to
a
it,
sort of
yeah.
reddy clay, and there's a blue clay, depending on where it is in the substrata.
I've always wondered why the road diverts at Henston. It's quite a harsh diversion, isn't it? To do a big cutting to make the road, haven't they? Why didn't we just take it straight over?
Okay, and also the other thing about Hensting Lane is it is an ancient crossing for toads. In the season when the toads are migrating, we used to get hundreds of toads killed on that lane, and the Trevor Scott and Sandra Scott used to organise a party, and we'd all go down there with our buckets and scoop the toads up and take them across the
in
lane.
March, if you go up into Swift's farm at 10 o'clock at night, you
Hundreds of toads.
They're just everywhere. There's thousands of them.
And because they're migrating to the natural water, on when they come out of the woods and across the road, don't know where they start off. How we get back?
Yeah, we said along Hensting Lane, if you go up, there's a sharp bend. I don't know if that's part of the field boundaries or parish boundaries, and it goes quite a deep lane. Could be a boundary setting. Yeah, so we walked along the main road, pointed out on the left there's a little footpath going to Hensting Lane that can carry on to Swift's Farm and to Marwell, up to Owslebury. If you go further along Hensting Lane, you can bear on the left, go up to Twyford along the Downs. Very scenic route. I think some parts are very muddy, talking about the clay, where the clay comes to the surface there.
It's a very muddy
It's a lovely walk, that road.
Yeah. Yeah, we're on Nobs Crook here. Not quite sure what it's called. Nobs Crook could be part of a shepherd's crook. In the past, it's had a K on in other sort of land maps. Here from Nobs Crook, there's a large house called Fowler's Court. We can't see it; it's hidden by trees. But from coming down from Fair Oak, you get a little bit of a better view. But the trees have grown up, and coming in, we saw up the sell sign. I think that must have been part of the gardener's cottage to Fowler's Court. And further along, opposite the Queen's Head, the Fisher's Pond, there's the gatehouse. Still sort of I think that's an individual house now, but it hasn't changed much since the late 19th century when it was built. Fowler's Court, I think it's had many uses in the past. At one time, I think it was a small private school, but it must be now, is it private flats or
offices.
It's offices now. Yeah, it was a private school for a number of years.
Businesses.
It was a private dwelling until sort of the early 20th century.
It's split up. There are about 4 or 5 businesses in there now, small businesses.
But coming down the hill from Fair Oak, there's a lovely view over Colden Common, see all the woods and very rural area, and looking over onto Hensting. We carry along.
If you just look over the hill there, the White House, you can just make out halfway along the top of the wall, just under the eaves, there's the clock on there, which is very
may know who lived in Spring Lane called Daphne. I think she was born in the
Daphne Brown.
cottage with the clock tower.
was she?
Yes, and
Daphne who?
Daphne Brown. Is that
no, not Daphne
No,
Brown.
no, they live
Another
in
Daphne.
New Road.
She lived opposite the Rising Sun pub. The cottage that's gone back, and the husband was unwell for many years.
So his husband was George, wasn't
Yeah, George. But she was born, and she's lived all her life in, and she used to walk around the village with her dogs and looked after her husband, and passed away a couple of years ago, Daphne. Her good friends with Mary, who lived opposite her.
The farm up as you go up beside the house, Prairie Hill Farm, and that was in their family for many years, in the boys' family, as was Kennel Lane and Kennel's Farm and Hempsing Farm. So as I've been doing the village history, they all keep cropping up in the family.
Yeah, yeah, super. Yes, we'll carry along Nobs Crook here. That's Leyland's Farm. Now, I'm not quite sure about the history of Leyland's Farm. It's been mentioned in the 1841 as a farm building of some kind for many years, but now has been converted into a little business park and offices. There's a lodge here where a farm manager used to live. And this is a little network of paths again, down to Bishop Stoke Woods and Stoke Park Farm. A lovely walk, I believe, in the springtime, full of bluebells. Could be a little bit muddy. Along here, there's a nice little walk. Back of Church Lane, you meet Bishop Stoke Lane. I think it is a reasonable walk, maybe one or two little damp patches. As a matter of interest, local sort of interest and recent, let's talk about development in Colden Common. I believe in the next 10 or 20 years, Colden Common has to have, I think, 240 new homes. I think the final decision is going to be made in 2015 by Winchester, where these developments are taking place. There are varying sites that have come up, and there's a meeting in a couple of weeks' time where people can put forward their ideas again. But a new site which has come up, and they mention advantages of this site, is along here. There's a field that runs from the back of here to Church Lane, where Church Lane goes down the hill at the end of the bungalows. And I think on this site it's going to be quite a large field. There's not a great agricultural use at the moment, and at the beginning of the site they're going to have a community orchard near Church Lane, and at the end of the site there'll be a woodland planted. But I think there'll be more information at this meeting in 3 weeks' time on a Sunday. Well, this is my last little talk. We're going to walk slowly back to the community centre along this little lane. It's a lovely little lane. It's dried up now. It could be a bit damp in the winter, but some lovely individual houses again, renovated houses. And on the way back, we're going to go past Church Pond again and see the new seat. I can explain that has of interest. It was formerly from the Environment Agency, but they have moved, so I shall explain the new seat. Then as you can see, Colden Common, again, we've got the centre of Colden Common in the triangle, but we've got so many other little sections of Colden Common. Fisher's Pond, Nobs Crook, Hensting Lane, and you see it's very rural here. The woodland, small little fields, hedges, and we can see the hay baled up, and it's been kind to us as well. Well, thank you for your interest and questions, and Jeff is going to leave
I'm
us.
just going to add something about it's a very pleasant walk to Eastleigh town. If you ever fancy doing it, it'd take about an hour and a half, sort of normal speed walking. But the way you're going back to community centre, if you actually walk to here and then follow this footpath here, just follow it direct, it goes to Stoke Park Farm, and then you follow the main driveway to Stoke Park Farm, comes out at the top of Bishop Stoke Park, by the cemetery, if you know it, and then you can cut through the houses down the church lane, I believe it is, to the Itchin Navigation, and then by Bishop's Recreation Ground, and it's a very pleasant walk, and over the railway bridge here in Eastleigh, and get the bus back.
Yes, I believe there's sort of a tea and cakes at the community centre. We have a little discussion. Well, thank you for your interest. It's been a lovely morning. I think I've discussions with Maureen about another walk. We've done 3 walks, and another part of the village we'd like to cover is Brambridge and Highbridge. We can just see it in the distance, a few buildings, but that has a lot of interest in itself. So hopefully, I'll discuss with Nick and Maureen possible dates for that, and we'll let you know. Anyway, thank you very much. Yes, anyway, we walked.
It used to be owned by a guy called Dan Biddlecombe, and he was the local gamekeeper. Sort of up until he was an old boy when I was a boy, so he's obviously long dead, but in the sort of 50s and 60s, as I say, he was a local gamekeeper. And you've got a picture in the magazine you had when we were at church. You had the page open, and there's a little cottage with a couple stood outside outside of it. I think their name was Fiddler.
Yes,
and they were next door.